We should be live.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Morning, everyone. We'll get underway.
Good morning.
Regulatory committee agenda. Apologies, please. We have an apology from Councillor Rawls. No apologies. Moved by Carmen, seconded by Andrew. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Thank you. Today we have Councillor Malcolm, Councillor Forbes, and Councillor Scott, I believe, on Zoom.
Oh, so we are. We might just mark.
Do we have Councillor Scott on Zoom?
Yes, he just put his thumbs up to you.
All right.
And we had Steve Rushbrook on Zoom.
There's Anita underneath it. Okay, cool. Thank you. We'll move on. We have no public forum. Confirmation of agenda. Everyone happy with the agenda? Cool. Conflicts of interest. Reminded about conflicts of interest. Confirmation minutes.
I'll be withdrawing the items, parts of item 7,
Sorry.
as I've got a resource consent in at the moment.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I'll sit back from the forestry discussion and the quarterly report from the regulatory team.
So, thank you. Noted.
And I'll do the same. It's Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
And Gary, while I'm interrupting you, can you please put the OSV Council chamber camera on? Is there a reason that's on?
Good question.
Chamber. That should be. Speaker view. I'll have a look. I'll call item.
I was going to call IT Brian. If that's okay.
It should be here.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Moving on to that's capital complex. Moving on to confirmation of minutes. Anybody prepared to move? Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Pope. All in favour? Against? Scary. Thank you. Well done, team. There are no outstanding actions. Regulatory committee. Excuse me. Minutes for consideration. So we'll start with regulatory report, item 7.1, quarterly activity report. Got Richard, Tammy, and Joe.
Thanks, Gary. So just apologies for Simon Wilson and Steve Rushbrook is calling in online, but obviously available to answer any questions re the Harbour Master, who had a bit of activity yesterday out in Carries Bay. Look, I know we can just take this as read and answer any questions, but just, I suppose, looking at the data in the attachment, I'd just acknowledge the work the team has done in another testing year with COVID and other things, but you know, the numbers are really positive, and it's not all about numbers, it's about quality as well, but it's great to see them in terms of the processing of consents, the number of site visits and the number of performance monitoring returns they've managed to undertake in what's been a relatively trying year. So I suppose it's a good chance when we get here in a public meeting to acknowledge the work of the staff, and otherwise we'll just do what we normally do and answer any questions that councillors have on the report.
Well done. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to questions. Councillor Kelvin.
2 wee questions, just consent inquiry response times.
Can you give us a page? Sorry.
Page 21.
Thanks.
They seem to be higher now. Is that just because is it extraordinary? I mean, you've said that we've had a whole lot more inquiries and things. It's just that they seem to be mostly the 3 to 7 days rather than within 2 days. It seems to have gone up. Is that something that we're just getting under?
There's some volume there, but there's also some complexity as well, and we do like to ensure that we're providing the correct advice and to provide.
That's good.
Yeah, I know, and making sure that we are giving them the right advice that's fit for purpose. We are also finding that we're going out on site as well. So sometimes when we record it when we get the inquiry, but we may not get out on site until day 3 or 7. So that can be that the response time is slightly longer.
So would we expect that might continue just because of the things you've just
Yeah, and
described.
this is the first year that we are sort of recording those response times in terms of days, and we're just looking to benchmark for this first year of them and then set a target in terms of level of service. But in terms of public inquiries and resources available and things that are there, we're really pushing that, and we've had great uptake from that, which is awesome.
Excellent.
Just in relation to that too, Hilary, as the numbers go up, we would expect to see a few more. The public inquiries is obviously general rate funded. We know that we have challenges in the regulatory budget around our revenue, so we are not looking to take staff time off processing consents to deal with public inquiries because it's not funded in our budget. So that will inevitably lead to some longer timeframes for responses where the volumes just become too great for the 2 staff that we do have allocated. So we obviously manage it, and if it becomes a real issue, we would drop another staff member there to support, but we're conscious of allowing those staff whose time is budgeted to be recoverable to be doing that work.
Yeah, so we do expect it to be a wee bit longer
Yeah.
for those reasons, but we're onto it, as it
Yes,
were.
and we triage what comes in, and we do let people know that we've received your inquiry, and just those customer service things.
The other thing in these stats look to be that, and I'm not sure what page it was at, page 26. It seems to be going really well, but page 26, dairy, least full compliance. Anything about why that might be? Are we asking more from them, or are they being less compliant, or what's behind that?
Yeah, through the chair. So the dairy program in the most recent season, we expanded what we are looking at in terms of the permitted activities. So to include farm landfills, offal pits and silage stacks specifically. And so that's where some of that non-compliance is coming through in terms of the rules.
So that's not because they've got worse so much as that the things are changing, and that would they take a while to learn what is expected of them. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that ought to hopefully come right next year
for-
again,
Yep,
because they're just generally a compliant lot by the look of it.
we would expect to see that, as we educate on some of the new rules within Plan Change 8 and some of the other rules that Tammy just referred to. By and large, we find the dairy farmers to be responsive to those conversations and take action. So we'd expect to see improvements year on year.
Excellent. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Malcolm, then Councillor Hope, then Councillor Deaker.
Good morning. Thanks very much. Just going to page 8, paragraph 18, which is around 4 formal objections on costs over that reporting period. And I'm just wondering, it's probably just a more question to Richard, I suppose, is what actually is the cost of running one of these objections? And have we thought of a better process, or are we compelled to go through that process?
I'll let Joe talk about the average cost to us, because it is an unbudgeted cost. But in terms of the process, we just need to recognise this process is set within the RMA. So we follow that process as it is set out. But Joe, do you have costs?
Not to hand, but there is staff time in terms of preparing a report to respond to the cost inquiry. So there's potentially up to 10 hours by the time you review the file, write the report and do that. So that's unbudgeted time. And then there's also the cost for anybody who then hears that objection, be that either councillor time or independent commissioner time, which we have to absorb the cost of that. Where possible, we do look at having a discussion with them about costs beforehand, but the formal process is provided for under the RMA, and once we're in that process, we've got no choice but to follow it. We do have templates set up to make it as efficient as possible, but when you're looking at costs, you do have to look at that specific application, and it can take time.
And what I would say there is, we've looked a lot at our fees and charges and improving our processes around invoicing and making sure that we are charging fair and reasonable as the RMA sets out. I know there is a feeling that, could we avoid this process by just sitting down and negotiating? I mean, if we do that, every time, then no one's going to pay their full invoice. They'll just lodge an objection expecting that we'll come back and say, well, we'll knock some off and avoid the hearing. So, we put faith in the fact that we are running an appropriate process and charging fair and reasonably. And if people aren't happy with that, then they have a formal process that they can go through. And for me, that's the appropriate way to do it.
Good. Thanks for showing that rigor. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you. You're all done. Kevin, councillor Hart.
Thank you. I have 6 questions, and all different, if that's okay.
It's good.
Yes,
Variety's good.
Um,
Yeah, the same ones at the time.
Thank you, councillor Deacon. Firstly, you've got a wastewater discharge consent from Clutha District for Waiholder Township, and it's a 6-year period. Is that because Waiholder's growing, or is it because they've had an upgrade, or it's just I've been asked about this and it's nice to be able to give some facts and answers.
Yes, so 6-year term, and that was a decision by the independent decision maker. And it is that there are some upgrades and planning required for that system, and some issues with in terms of receiving water quality and things like that. But the consent term is appropriate, and it gives the consent holder the right amount of time to make some decisions that they need to make. That's not for us to make those decisions for them.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. If we flip over to pages 8 and 9, which is your public inquiries and your new change group, I just want to say, Richard, I've had the pleasure of having your staff come to our Red Profit Meat Partnership group, and they were absolutely brilliant. Compliance and consenting, and I think Izzy from the office was really wonderful. I wonder if you would think about, please, one comment was made to me, is it possible, not on the website, but just to have a factual page that people can pick up, farming people can pick up as they go past, will be given on the day, just with a very simple timeline. There's got, you've got plan change
For
aid.
what in particular?
Just they know when they're going to have to comply with different things. And
right.
we know that we iterate at home very, very well. But sometimes people are just looking for that document that they can take away with them. And I think it would be pertinent to have that, simply because you're going from some rule changes to other changes, and it's the timeline. And I know you're working on your computer to get those, where you can go online and you'll be able to lodge to make your application. But those bits are really critical, and I've been asked to pass it on. Absolutely outstanding staff. Can't thank you enough for that. And I would just reiterate to any group here that is thinking in Otago to have you aboard. Your main aim is just fantastic. It's always, we're here to help. Ring us and ask us, and that was a great message throughout the day, as well as what you're doing. Obviously, you have to enforce and compliance, but there's an education role as well, and I think it's terrific, and I really would like to thank you very much for that. The second part I'd like to ask you on 9 is page 9. You've got 27 there. You've got about when you want to, you can't meet permitted activity, you need to apply for a resource consent. And down the bottom it says, these have been shared with other councils, the hope of ensuring consistency, and will be provided to stakeholders with feedback and tested before going live for people to use. Had you thought about doing a pilot scheme on that?
So that's what the testing is.
Yes, but yes.
Yeah. So we are looking at getting some farmers to test those in certain areas, and that's through discussing it with our catchment team, and then also just other people that have made inquiries through our consents team and with other catchment groups about testing those. So I've had regional stakeholder feedback, so DairyNZ and people like that this week, and then we're looking at doing that in-field testing over the next couple of weeks. I do appreciate that there's some urgency from members of the public, but that we want to make sure we're doing a form that is going to be able to be used, and that there's also certainty that those regulations apply. So
that's great.
So there's
definitely a lot of support there.
Oh, great.
That's really good. On page 10, you've got down the bottom 35, you talk about your inspections, and then you go on to page 11, you talk about significant wetland audits. Can I ask, please, when you do an audit, what are you looking for? The wetlands, I have no idea, so, or just a little glimpse.
Yeah. Look, through the chair, we're looking at whether or not there's been specifically any drains that have been installed or anything that is impacting on the regionally significant wetlands. We currently walk the perimeter of the wetland to observe what's happening there, and then just assess compliance against the water plan regulations. Yeah.
Thank you, Tammy. And I've got 2 more, and then I promise I'll leave everybody else to it. Number 14 is you talk about at the very top. You've got 1, 2, 3, The third point down talks about farm workshops across the Taylor region, and the next part is educational leaders to lead offenders in relation to domestic chimney, outdoor burning. Are we still seeing a lot of that domestic chimney complaints? I know Councillor Deagle, we could say people really wouldn't they about, just smoke chimneys and that across the kiln. Are we still getting a lot of those
Yes.
types of complaints?
Yep.
Are they a bit more pictorial now? Do people have a phone and can show the evidence?
Yeah, it's a mix.
Yes.
It's certainly a mix. And in terms of complaints, so if you go to page 38, there's the chart there which shows the type of complaints we're receiving through the pollution hotline. And so domestic chimneys is number 4 in terms of frequency, just under 150 this financial year. So certainly there are those complaints. It is a seasonal thing.
Yes.
So yeah, we are receiving those.
Thank you. And my last question through the chair, which is for our harbour master on page 16. You've been on this wonderful fully exercise. I see there that you talk about coming together with search and rescue. Harbour master, what were the learnings from that, please, if you don't mind me asking?
So what were the learnings?
Yes, as in it was a great exercise. Was there anything you would do differently again? You can incorporate into.
Yeah, I think it was a big exercise for this area, led by the police search and rescue team. Any opportunity provides learnings in just how we're operating in the search and rescue environment, how other agencies would prefer to utilise our asset, and how our expertise can input to some of those scenarios that were played out on the day. I know Pete and Jennifer were on board the boat, and they were pretty quick to pick up a number of dummies in locations, which assisted the speed of all of that. And I think the learning outcomes is really about communication of the interagency groups, really, and then the speed at which you can react and respond in those given scenarios.
Thank you. And Harbour Master, would you like to see more of those types of involvements with search and rescue and things? It must be great for Otago to have us all come together.
Yes, certainly. They provide a face-to-face environment for us with all of those agencies. We've done 1 or 2 in Central Otago as well with the teams out there. So I think we're pretty well linked in. The police have a remit to do a major one every year. They do a number of smaller ones with Surf Life and other members throughout the year as well. So we do get notifications, and at every opportunity, we take that opportunity to interact.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deagle.
Oh, thanks, Gary. I wanted to go back to, is this mic going, by the way?
You push it.
I don't know.
You don't need to, it's up. I think the whole,
It's all new to me.
God's listening to you, Michael.
Oh, goodness me. I wanted to refer back staff, particularly Joe, to figure 18 that Hilary mentioned before, the dairy inspection grades year on year. Rightly or wrongly, my eye always goes to the top of those, and I am impressed by the way in the last 5 or 6 years these numbers have continually shrunk, it seems to me, in terms of significant non-compliance, which means that our relationship with the dairy industry has got better year after year. I was chatting to some dairying friends, I don't know, a month ago, who made the same observation, that whereas we used to be at arm's length and frequently fronting up in court and pinging people for huge amounts of money, it doesn't seem to happen anymore. And that's something that we should all rejoice in. And I think we should give our staff a lot of credit for that, because they led us to a much more strategic approach in ensuring compliance of the dairy industry, and the industry has responded accordingly. Now, having said all that, Joe, am I overstating it?
I'll refer on to Tammy, who can take all the credit for that.
Yeah, okay. Tammy, am I overstating the fact that things have got significantly better in the last 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really fair comment. And it is recognition to both the compliance team working with the farmers, but also the farmers themselves and the industry groups that are supporting farmers to make their environmental planning and decisions.
Okay, so this, sorry, Richard, I'll come back to you. This 2% that's still showing up at the top of the column there in red, are they just hard nuts who we deal with every year and who don't respond? Or is it a random group of people who suddenly make a significant error in terms of effluent storage or whatever else?
I can't comment on specific cases, but I think we're now getting to the end where potentially a malfunction has occurred or something has occurred to create that significant non-compliance. That being said, we'll take appropriate action on a case-by-case basis as to how we deal with that.
When was the last time you took a law-based action against a dairy farmer?
You mean legal proceedings? I was before my time.
That in itself is very significant. Richard, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that I think the critical thing is the collective approach now, because we've also got the environmental implementation team with the catchment advisors who used to operate in a complete silo from the regulatory team, and obviously that they do have a slightly different role, but by Tammy and Andrea and prior to that it was Rebecca and Nicole working much more closely on a plan to support the dairy industry and bringing the industry groups like Dairy NZ and Fonterra to the table, we just get far better coverage, and we're not left with compliance being able to, if we have too many cases we're trying to deal with, then we just don't get around to communicate as we should. But if the catchment advisors play a critical role and have some excellent expertise we can rely on, clearly the industry groups are critical for us, and the relationships that Tammy and Joe are building with them to support the regulatory program is making a big difference as well. So I think in terms of learning and what to change, that's probably the big one. Is looking at it as a sort of collective exercise with all these parties to try and support, but also where there is non-compliance, deal with it and deal with it properly. And we will do that if we come across stuff.
It's certainly a vastly happier picture for the environment and for us and for dairy folks than it used to be a few years ago.
It's good progress. Okay, thank you, Chinu, and then Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Gary. My question probably for Richard, and it's around the RMA investigation enforcement report which you lead. And
Tammy led that one.
take that back. The question's for Tammy. Sorry. Is there a political role here? Obviously, the minister has received the report, and I'm just wondering, should that be also backed up with some political beating of the drum, so to speak, to get those better CME outcomes, delivery outcomes?
Through the chair, that report really identified some of the challenges there are in the current RMA enforcement space. I'm certainly really heartened that the ministry has taken on board the findings of this report and understand that a lot of those recommendations, constructive recommendations provided in the report, are going to be taken through into the Natural and Built Environment Act, which will make our job a lot easier in terms of having additional tools at our disposal, and also the resourcing of CME across the regional sector in terms of being able to charge for monitoring permitted activity work, which is currently not the space. In terms of whether or not there's a role for political advocacy, I guess the regional CEs have provided this report to the minister and are in constructive conversations with him. I think that would be a matter for the council to consider whether you wanted to do anything in that space.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think that's right. It was commissioned by, or the report was completed by the compliance specialist group, and Tammy led it on behalf of all of the regional councils with input from a number of different people. It was reported back through the CEs group who signed it off before it went to the minister. I don't know what the interaction may or may not have been between the CEs group and the chairs group.
It was certainly reported back, but I just wondered whether.
So that would be probably a conversation to have collectively with the chairs, because I don't think political support is ever, if it's there and there's a willingness, then it's helpful.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, well done. Thank you. Councillor Scott, and sorry, we don't have the chamber camera back on yet, but staff are underway trying to make that happen.
I'm just making sure everybody's there, you know. Just following up from the last 2 points, the last 2 questions, the RMA report. I'd just like reminding basically where our enforcement, legal enforcement, where that's actually reported on. Reading the RMA report is quite interesting, some of the things that they point out. For example, the timeliness issues and the fact that the average time taken for cases to be resolved is 468 days from the date in which charges are filed. Where do we put our legal proceedings reporting?
So, some of the data in that report. So Brian, I think, sorry, I'm just having a quick chat to Tammy on the site. At the moment, some of the metrics that were included in that report, we haven't reported up through councils. There's probably a takeaway there for us. I think what I'm hearing is you'd be quite interested in some of those numbers. So, we can definitely start adding additional metrics to this report. So we report how many days it takes for a case to go through the court process.
Well, even to know what cases, Councillor Decker ultimately asked the question, when was the last dairy prosecution? I'm sure I read one in the newspaper relatively recently, but what this report says, in the interests of natural justice, is important that the prosecutions are initiated and undertaken confidently, competently, and consistently. But that's also communication through to governance. So I, for one, would like to see some reporting on that side of things. I understand that some things might be confidential, but nevertheless.
Yeah, all right. We'll have a look at the appropriate way that we can do that. Normally I would send out an email for those sort of significant cases that are going to court before they appear in the media, which is usually before the first appearance. But if there's a more formal way we can do that, we can have a look at it.
Yeah, and as you said, the metrics like timeliness and so forth. But thank you. And my second question was just in relation. I'm just flicking back to page 10. I'll try to do that quickly. Page.
Just while you're getting there, further to the metrics. So there is an annual CME metrics report, which is developed by that compliance special interest group, and that is reported annually in terms of the formal actions that have been taken. It doesn't go to the level of detail in terms of the days. That certainly is outside of our control. Once our charging documents are submitted, it falls into the court process, and that's certainly outside of our control in terms of.
No, that's fine, but it's certainly a big part of our operation and expenditure is legal costs. And commitments. Thank you. Page 10. Thank you for your various process improvements. Paragraph 31, one that interested me, one was the development of a GIS layer to be used for dairy effluent and domestic wastewater discharge areas. And so my question is, what are you going to do with that information? What are you going to do with that information?
So there's several uses for that actually. So one is that when a discharge consent is issued for a farmer, that discharge area will be mapped, so it shows exactly where they can and can't discharge the effluent to land. So it's a tool for them to show where they can and can't discharge the effluent. So they've already told us that in the application, but it's just a visual representation of where they can and can't go. And that resource can then be used by compliance as well. But it then also helps us when we get requests for, how big are your discharge areas in Otago? Where is effluent discharged? And that resource will be then available on Otago maps. So it's information that we are collecting, but it's then also making sure that we are making use of that information and that it is accessible where appropriate.
Yeah, no, cool. I'm also hoping that when you actually look at their streams and their rivers, and you look at the water quality, and when we identify the areas of concern, that when you map that you'll also be connecting it with, the wastewater scheme, effluent map, and the dairy effluent map, just to see if there's any connections there, so that I'm hoping that regulatory is talking with science and
Yep.
so forth.
I actually just got a message from Anita as you were speaking, Brian, saying that there is this is a very useful tool for policy and science in the development of plans and assessment of risk. So absolutely, and I think that's one of the conversations that ORC's been having, certainly since I've been here, and I know I discuss it with Gavin quite a lot, is we hold a massive amount of data, particularly in the regulatory space through consent condition reporting, and we don't necessarily make the best use of that data. So these sort of map layers are us trying to make better use of all the data we're collecting to inform some of our other processes.
Cool. And it's all part of the integrated approach that we're endeavouring to do. Hey, thank you for your work. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Malcolm, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I did put up. I had a second question last time, but look, just while we're on this, the RMA investigation and enforcement report, we just do. There is a question, so don't panic. When we look at a case where we might get a fine of $40,000 and it's cost us, and this is in the paper, and it's cost us some $300,000 to get that enforcement and some $255,000 worth of legal costs. The imbalance seems to be that us doing a really good job to ensure that we are enforcing and looking after the environment, the costs, these fines just don't seem to fit with what's actually happening. So what confidence have you got, Richard, that might be aligned a wee bit better, and or if nothing more, the ability for us to get a greater recovery on those costs?
Yeah, so I think the message that's come back from the Minister has been very positive in respect of raising the maximum fines that can be applied for this type of those types of prosecutions. So every council struggles with the same problem. It is imperative that we continue to take that action where there is negligence or gross non-compliance. It's our duty to do that. And yes, it's expensive. And yes, it's incredibly frustrating at the low level of fines sometimes applied by the court, given the cost councils incur to make sure our case is strong. But the Minister's heard that loud and clear thanks to that report that Tammy led, and the feedback from MFE has been that there is very likely to be some changes to lift those maximum fines, which would obviously act as a deterrent, but also enable councils to better recover some of the costs that we incur to take that action.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Tammy, for the work on that. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just add to that undertaking this type of enforcement action is not a cost recovery exercise, and the cost incurred is not a factor that we consider when we assess whether or not to prosecute someone. It is the public interest test and it's the evidential test in terms of whether or not we proceed to court proceedings.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Deaker and Councillor Kelvin.
Thanks, Gary. Just a wee question that I forgot earlier on. It refers back to para 10 to do with deemed permits. And in about the third sentence you say, and I guess it's you, Joe, that work is continuing on remaining applications. And I wonder whether you could expand on those two words. How many are out there still floating around? Are they significant or are they rats and mice?
Yeah, so we're progressing through our staging plan, and I don't have the specific number to hand, but we are moving into those ones that are potentially just while still controlled activities and have been amended, might be a little bit more challenging because of their location, but we're working with the applicants and their representatives on those. So we're moving into the ones that are the Minahirikea, Strath Tyre, so they're in that next stage of the plan. We've had the amendments come in. We are dealing with people around their water data and rerunning that, but really happy with how that is progressing. And yeah, the bulk of them information comes in and we're able to deal with the consultants on those.
Can you have a mental picture of what day there will be when we say, part of our history, thank goodness it's over.
No. I would love it to be, as soon as possible, but we do have to be aware of the the workload that exists for the consultants who are dealing with these and the time pressures and things like that. But as soon as possible would be great.
Certainly.
We'll keep. I know I don't send as many reports as we used to because it's just another email for you to see. But I will make sure you get semi-regular updates on how many are left that we've got through the process, just so you're aware.
You certainly did a great job in keeping us up to date.
Yeah.
At the peak of the
Yeah.
period. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I just noticed in answer to the previous, I think it was Councillor Malcolm's question, the Minister may increase the fines for people, but there's two bits of the cost, isn't there? There's our costs and the fine. As you say, that's not what we're thinking about. We're thinking about achieving a result, namely people complying. But the other part of that cost is the court costs and other things that the person who fails in their at court pays costs to the other person, and they don't cover, of course, the full costs, party to party costs. But the question I have is, do we attempt at all to try and keep those legal costs that we won't fully recover? We can win completely, but the recovery is less than it might be. And one of the ways we might be able to contain our costs is to say, instead of spending the extra 100,000, can we do it without spending the extra 100 that we'll never recover because the judge won't give them to us? And that won't be something the Minister deals with, because the judge will do it on party to party.
I mean, the simple response to that, and Tammy can have a go, is we will bring in the necessary expertise to make sure we are very confident in the case we are taking. That's the short answer.
Yes.
We don't. I think it would be, and I know this is not what you're suggesting, so don't think it. The worst thing we could do is start trying to cut corners to keep those costs down. We should build the best case without being extravagant, and we're not. We're conscious of that, but we certainly, if we're going to the point of taking it to court and it becomes a defended hearing, we need to make sure we are very confident with the work that we are putting in to give us the best chance to be successful in that case. So yes, we're conscious, but no, we don't consider directly opportunities to reduce those costs. We are just looking at making sure we build the best case so that ORC has the best chance for a positive result.
Yes, and I don't suggest you do it any other way. But but there's lawyers and lawyers, and I can say this. I mean, there's costs and costs, and we are a very good target for lots of costs and whatever. So I'm just saying that to get absolutely the information we need without just being a target of somebody's high net worth client list, somewhere in there, maybe it's worth just reflecting from time to time or looking whether there's, I'm just.
We do that. Yeah.
So, you had one more question.
I did, if you wouldn't mind us, the patience. Ms. Gilroy, you talked about the GIS map before, and Councillor Scott made a good point about waterways and things like that. But I was thinking about if you had a farm and you had your dairy field mapped, and then the farm sold and it changed hands, and suddenly there was a new activity. Show me that GIS map would sit there for a very, very long time. That's what I'm getting at, that you would see the differences perhaps in land activity, whether you went back to dairy and the rest of those paddocks. But it would be there for quite some time. So if someone was to come in and view records or topography, they can see that.
Yes, so if a property like a dairy farm is sold, the consent would get transferred and go to the new owner. So that map would also go with that consent, and they would also be able to see any changes of that layer as well.
Fantastic tool, isn't it? Yes. Well done, Judy. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you. All done questions?
Happy to move the two recommendations that we note the quarterly report. compliance audit and performance monitoring schedule.
Happy to
I'll
see
second.
Thank you. And seconded by,
Whatever.
sorry, councillor Calvert. Right, any discussion? No, okay, I'll put it.
Just to note, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Plenty going on. Thank you.
Cool. Yes, very good. Thank you. Got a motion, all in favour? Against, carried, thank you. Moving on to 7.2. I see something with the report. We can take it as read, I'm sure. Richard, Tammy, any additional comments you'd like to make for your questions?
Yeah, I suppose this is again just a continuation of the issue-specific reports that we bring to most of the regulatory committee now. So we'd indicated previously that there was one coming on drinking water. It is topical with the Three Waters reform, and these consents will be absorbed by the new entity. So it's important that we have up-to-date compliance data to share with them and have some discussions with that entity when they're formed. So you'll note in the report, Waitaki and DCC, those audits were delayed due to COVID. They've been undertaken in the last few weeks, or they might even be being undertaken this week. So that'll provide us that full up-to-date set of compliance data that we'll be able to share with that entity, and those conversations are starting. So it's really just to provide that picture to council. Obviously, drinking water is incredibly important, and I suppose noting it's not just about the TLA treatment plants. We've got a number of bores which carry a lot of risk. So there's been some excellent work done, particularly by Mel Heather over in the Wanaka office, supported by the staff to sort of up our game in that space as well. So again, happy to take questions on any of this. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Questions, Councillor Hope, Councillor Deaker.
Thank you. On page 56, we've got just about consent monitoring. I just have a quick query, if I can, under that discussion. You've got E and F, you've got damming of water and working in rivers. I'm not sure if I've got this right in my head, which is why I'm asking. You're not talking about a gallery to extract, are you, when you talk about E and F? I don't think I've got that bit right. I'm just asking what they're for your different consent monitoring. And my take, I was looking at damming of water and working in rivers, and I'm thinking, are you working in a river to put a gallery down to extract water? Is that, I am right under it? Thank you. I just
That's right.
had that question.
Yeah, it's a type of consent that's often issued as part of the package of consents for water treatment.
Yeah, and I just have one more, if I may, which I would like to thank you very much for the work you have done on bores and bore. I think you must have seen a great improvement. It's such a good booklet you've put out about it. And as you say, the common problem is the ceiling. Yeah, but that is a very, very good book. And I've said to so many people that they need to get in touch and get that book. I just think it's a must. People are very unaware of it. So I appreciate it. And please pass our thanks on to Mel Heather over Wanaka and all your team for that good work. It's a huge uplift. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And just to recognise, Mel Heather was pivotal in that, but also we drew on our advice from our science team as well in the development of that science team too. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor Deaker, then Councillor Scott.
Thank you. The bar graph on page 57 caught my eye big time, with 23.1% significant non-compliance. Where was that and who was that?
Look, it is a mix. Clutha District Council is one of the TLAs that has the highest proportion of significant non-compliance. We can, once the Waitaki and Queenstown Lakes consent monitoring has been completed, we'd be happy to share a bit of a framework that gives you a bit more detail.
Yeah.
In fairness, we didn't want to do that at this meeting, given that we didn't have that information.
Okay, I can accept that, but and I think we all know about the Clutha ones anyway.
No, so these are water treatment, different to wastewater. So the point I was going to make is for those of you that this was a long time ago, because it was pre-Tammy starting, I think, where we reported on the wastewater treatment compliance following the audits we did in Clutha and realising we needed to have a really good look at wastewater treatment. Those numbers are probably slightly better in terms of overall compliance than the wastewater treatment plants, where they're still very concerning. But I have confidence in the relationships we've got with the TLAs now that they will be resolved. But overall, as a package, there's more in the full compliance and low risk non-compliance as a percentage than we saw with the wastewater treatment plants when we did a similar study. So, yep, the numbers, having 1 in 4 of significant non-compliance, we need to get that dealt with, and I'm confident we will. But I think, given that it's, what we've seen when we've done other, and I use wastewater treatment as an example, it's possibly not as much of a problem, and I'm more confident we can get it dealt with quickly as compared to the issues we found with wastewater.
Okay. I suppose, Mr. Chairman, the question that raised in my mind is, do the TLAs not know that they are significantly non-compliant? Does it come as a surprise when we rock up and say, hey, your drinking water is crap? Or have they got no way of knowing that themselves?
I just need to make this very clear. This is not the quality of their drinking water. So we need to be very careful. We're not passing judgment on the quality of the water they're supplying to the community. That's not something we look at. This is the environmental effects that may arise from the treatment process and subsequent discharges from that process. So we just need to be very clear, particularly given it's a public meeting, that this is not, and we would never be passing judgment on the quality of that drinking water. What we're looking for is, when you are operating your water treatment plants, there is the potential for environmental effects, and we expect you to comply with your consents. And obviously there was an article not long ago from the Clutha Mayor questioning our compliance process, and which I thought was inappropriate, because it is a very robust process and we expect full compliance, and they should be targeting nothing more than full compliance. And that's what this process is about. So
this is noting non-compliance of the existing consents.
That's correct.
Has been audited by our staff in their normal process.
That's correct.
Of wastewater.
And to Michael's point, it doesn't come as a surprise, because our staff audit these alongside their staff, and we provide them those audit reports.
Richard, I'm grateful for your admonition. I got that wrong, and I withdraw the reference to crap water. But I am looking forward.
Well, it was crap.
I am looking forward to having an explanation when it's.
We'll provide that breakdown.
23%. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Scott, then Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Deck has actually asked my question, and some of the question has been answered. But I will point out that just in relation to some of the responses, that on page 57, below the bar graph, it states quite clearly what the various reasons for significant non-compliance relate to, and there's 5 of them there. And I do remember in the ODT article, the reference to the third one, insufficient fish screening of takes, and then it directed subsequent, I think, letters to the editor reply. So I look forward to, this is an important area. I suspect there's quite a bit of education involved in this, and expectation, and I look forward to any further reports on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Councillor Wilson, then we've got Councillor Malcolm, Councillor Force.
In relation to the non-compliance, and I'm not at all condoning any non-compliance, but am I correct in believing the Clutha has one of the more complicated and lengthy systems to provide drinking water in Otago?
Oh, look, I probably can't comment on their systems. They do have 14 drinking water schemes, so that would be that's a large number for a small TLA to manage. In terms of the complexity of each of those drinking water schemes, I don't have the information to comment.
I think that's why Mayor Cadogan is on the Three Waters group, because I think they have got one of the, from what having sat to those meetings, because they're integrated into water. Sheep water supplies as well. I think they've got one of the most complicated systems. I'm not saying it's justification for being non-compliant, but it just means their pipes, the amount of pipe work they've got in Clutha is substantial, and just should be taken into account to an extent.
Cool.
And possibly justification why there is a change needed.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
Look, I'm just probably reinforcing what Mr. Saunders said, and that does relate to number 15, the paragraph under the graphs, which none of those issues relate to the quality of the water. It is all around actions around. So the water quality, we just shouldn't be going there. It's about how it's about actions around taking of the water. So yeah, I just hope no one takes a wrong inference, i.e. press or anything like that, because this report is about those clearly outlined 5 major breaches. So just wanted to reinforce that, especially for Cleartop.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forbes.
Interesting report, thank you, Richard. I've just got a question around paragraph 24, the cross-agency drinking water working group, and their wider group has been established. I'm just wondering why that extended group has yet to be convened.
Thanks. Yeah, through the chair, that's just really given navigating diaries across the various agencies and COVID disruptions in terms of that hasn't got off the ground yet. But it's certainly we regularly are meeting with Taumata Arawai, but that specific group is yet to be scheduled, that meeting.
Because that might be very helpful, mightn't it, for Mayor Cadigan, for example.
Potentially.
Yeah, good to see it happening. Was that extended group, when were those members added? Was that November 2020 as well, or was it later than that?
No, that was last year in relation to, so that's more around bore and water takes from bore and environmental risks there from the drinking water source. So yeah, but last year was when we invited Taumata Arawai in Central Otago District.
Right. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Any further questions? Right, okay, we have 2 recommendations. Right, thank you. We're both noting Councillor Hope has moved. There is a second, Councillor Calvert. Thank you. Any discussion? No, all good. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you. And that closes our meeting. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Councillor.